Shalom, shalom.
Good evening, Yehoshua Ben Moshe. How's it going?
Told me yo, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
All right, thank God. Yeah, one of my students told me a lot about you, and he said that you're really someone I should have on the podcast, that you have a pretty interesting story. Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
The main thing dealing with who I am, what I do, starting off with how I came into truth seeking and became a rabbi, that began when I was incarcerated.
Oh, wow.
And like most African American people here in America, I grew up in a Christian setting. Didn't really fully embrace Christianity simply because I wasn't religious. My mother, she was Christian. I was raised up in that environment. Fast forward behind the wall there in prison, I began to seek the truth. I began to read about different things, and ultimately I came to messianic doctrines and teachings dealing with the New Testament, as well as just the Tanakh in general, just researching things. And of course, if you're familiar with like this messianic type of movement, you become aware of basic things such as, Jesus, his name is Yeshua, and he's a Jew, and, things like that. And most of the writers in the New Testament, Jews.
Did you figure this out on your own, or did someone reach out to you?
This is just coming from, from people around me, just information.
Yeah. I was an assistant chaplain, and I remember when I was there, the Black Hebrew Israelites had a very huge influence there. There's a consciousness of Hebrew roots, people finding out that traditional Christianity just isn't going to cut it, right? Now, it's clearly not Orthodox or conservative or anything like that, but people are waking up to the fact, if they're Christian, they're realizing that Jesus was actually Jewish, and people are using that as a platform to explore other parts of religion. Yeah.
Right. You're exactly right. That became the actual thing that caused a lot of people in that type of movement and that type of environment to actually what is termed wake up, just based off of little things like that alone. And you're right. A lot of the institutions in the prisons, even here in America, you do have the Hebrew Israelite movements, the Moors, all these different black nationalist type of movements. I never really got into the radical stuff because when I first came into the messianic type of doctrine, it was more of a neutral thing. I was looking at books such as like Lou White. He's a white guy, but he's Israelite. And I read his whole book, but he's messianic. And so I read his books. And then, of course, I read books such as like Ben Ami and the black African Hebrew Israelite movement.
The guys who moved to Israel.
That became a great interest to me. But I've learned to consume certain things and then just move. I never really got stuck. So the thing that helped me out the most was this. Now, when you talk about how I came into certain information, well, there's a prison ministry here at the synagogue. Prison ministry, we go into different prisons and then we teach. At the time, my rabbi, Rabbi Moshe, he was coming into the facility that I was at. And what he was doing was he was bringing us straight Judaism. He understood the messianic mindset. He understood, even the Christian mindset because, he's been in ministry for 40 years. So, he came and started from Christianity and moved his way up to Judaism as a rabbi, as a modern Orthodox rabbi. And so he was able to come into the prisons and teach this group of Hebrew Israelites, Jews, and our group consisted of black and white at the time. And I'm talking about the group that was behind the wall in prison. And so he's coming, he's teaching us, and a lot of people walked out of the community or the group simply because, we were being taught the truth about the New Testament and how, there's so many different flaws in it. It's not what we think. Messianic is not even an actual, it's a misnomer. You can't be, you got to be one or the other. You got to either be Christian or Jew. And so he brought this type of idea to us. But the way he brought it to us through spirituality. Guys who sought after this type of spirituality, we stayed. We grew from that. The other guys that wanted to hold on to messianic beliefs, they left. Now,
What's the name of the organization?
The synagogue here is Congregation Yeshivat Sion.
Where's that at?
We are located in Kokomo, Indiana.
Wow. So you have basically a Jewish movement that goes to prisons and, I guess, for lack of a better word, evangelizes people to Judaism? I mean, that sounds great.
You can say that, but we would say that we were doing like what the prophets had spoken about. And that is, in particular, Jeremiah, when he spoke about the Most High Hashem, he would send many fishermen and many hunters to fish and harm his people. This idea is a Jewish concept of Keruv, the Keruv movement, Kabab, they do similar things to draw Jews closer, those who have Jewish souls. So it was more of a seeking for the Jewish souls amongst.
So I'm not a big fan of the whole Chabad ideology just because it does claim to be searching for Jewish souls. I proselytize, and I have no issue telling people that every time I see a Gentile, I just see a potential Jew trying to get out, right? So in my opinion, everyone's got a Jewish soul. It doesn't really matter why you do it as long as you do it, as long as you're out there spreading the light, changing lives. If you're doing it because you believe everybody has a Jewish soul, okay, fine. If you're doing it because you just see potential in people, that's also fine.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
But I'm glad to know that this exists. What's the rabbi's name?
My rabbi is Rabbi Moshe Ben Avraham, the spiritual leader or the rabbi of this community. The thing that sticks out the most with him, to me, is that the spirituality is not too common in Judaism itself. In Judaism, the highest spirituality that we could find or that we see is Kabbalah, which is good. And this is something that we utilize that in our things that we do. And so this spirituality is inclusive like that.
So when you were growing up, you grew up with traditional Christianity, or what were your parents?
Yes. My father, he was Muslim. Actually, he's Muslim, and my mother's Christian. Growing up, I didn't really know my father until I became older, 16, 17. Well, my biological father, I know him until, I was around that age. But I was raised primarily Christian, and so Baptist, just different types of denominations of Christianity. I never really knew or got up into the different denominations around that time. But, looking back, I can see differences. But primarily Baptist or something like that.
Were you ever devout Christian?
No, I wasn't. I was never really a devout Christian. I never really took it serious as far as really understanding what I'm doing. It was just mainly I'm going to go to church because my mom wants me to, or, I have to, or my auntie, I'm spending out at her house and spending out at my cousin's house, and, we got to go to church on Sundays, and, she played Sunday gospel music, and it was just more of because my parents did it, I'm doing it type of thing. And so, but when I became, got older and I began to actually look deeper into things, that's when that began to change.
Do you have any plans on continuing this ministry, you going back to prisons and helping people find Torah Judaism? Yes.
I actually do that now, but I do it through GTL, if you're familiar with what that is. Prisons here in America, they issue the inmates tablets, and on these tablets, the GTL it's a new network that they're able to connect to the outside world, opposed to the old way of just getting on a phone or having, like a visit from people.
Wow, this is new. How new is this? I mean, this is that has to be in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, this is in the last 2 or 3 years, and almost every prison in Indiana has this system, and it's like a really tight, closed network, and they have access to limited things. They don't have access to the internet, but they do have access to like different music, books, and things like that. They can get on their tablets, as well as email, and so they can send letters back and forth, video visits, things like that. And so I do that aspect. And so the different leaders behind the wall in the different communities, I'm in contact with them through this system. Now, the rabbis that are here that are able to go into the prisons, they go into the prison still. My Rebbe usually only goes when there's time to actually do the mikvah, the conversion for the guys who are going through the process or the classes. And so I cannot enter into it yet because of my record. So I have to wait some time before I can actually go into the prison. So, but the goal is, to actually do that.
How far are you from Chicago?
We are about roughly 2 hours from Chicago.
Yeah, because there, I don't know, like if you're familiar with Capers Funday.
Yes, I'm familiar with him. Let me rephrase that. I'm not familiar with him. I know of him. I had never met him, but there's some rabbis here that have met him and that know of him, or that actually that know him.
How did you feel about this ministry? It's a shame there isn't a Jewish word for it, right? I mean, there's kiruv, but ministry is really what it is, right? I mean, you're ministering to people, but you're bringing them Torah. Like instead of Jesus, like how do people in more mainstream circles feel about it? Because I know in traditional Orthodoxy, it's frowned upon. Because I've been doing it for many years. Not necessarily prisons, but I used to have a program that we'd go out and we basically minister to homeless people, right? And we're not trying to teach them Torah, but we would give them socks and chips, and then if they want to learn more, we'll give them a card. But most Jews don't feel, especially prisons, right? Now, there's Orthodox rabbis that go to prisons. Like I said, I worked in a prison for a little while, but it's for inmates who are Jewish, right? To help them put on tefillin or to lead high holiday services, but not in terms of encouraging people to become Jewish. And I'll tell you, most Orthodox Jews get a little scared with people who look different, and especially if those people have a criminal record. And they don't understand that the whole process of rehabilitation is having a past that you're not going to be proud of, right? But that just makes for the greater story. That just makes for a greater testimony on how God changed your life. And if he could change your life, he could change someone else's life. Right? But today, unfortunately, remaining, and just living in a Jewish community is more like being part of a country club, right? And, like if you don't look Jewish, if you don't have a Jewish sounding last name, they don't want to believe you're Jewish. And this is something that I think that we have to try to fix. And I think the way we fix it is by bringing more people to Judaism, converting people to Judaism, right? So then it's a mixture of peoples. It's not really racism. It's more what's called xenophobia. That means that they're scared of the unknown. But if there's so many converts to Judaism that, every synagogue will be full of Asian, Hispanic, Black, it's not going to be news when you tell somebody you're Jewish, because they'll be like, of course you're Jewish. There's like 50 other Black dudes, 20 other Spanish guys in the synagogue. It's nothing. Now, unfortunately, like if you walk into the average Orthodox synagogue, it's very, very pasty white. Right? And even though that synagogue could be located in a Black neighborhood, because most Orthodox communities, very large ones, are located in communities that are predominantly minority, that synagogue doesn't resemble the community around them. So that type of insularity takes effort, and it's kind of ugly. If you see a church or a mosque in any community, that church or mosque is going to resemble the community that it's located in. In other words, if it's a Spanish community, there's going to be Spanish folks in it. I'm all for de-ethnicizing Judaism. If you like falafel or bagels, yeah, that's fine, but don't combine that with religion. Separate that, because the Torah is there to make decent people better, to help you.
Exactly.
I'm glad that it helped you, and I mean that we're speaking now and you're helping a lot more people. I think with this network that you have, because you know more about it and how it exists in terms of almost having a pen pal in prison, I think that you could start an organization and get a lot more Jews involved. Because I'm sure there's a lot of Jews out there who want to do good, who have no problem with learning with someone, just like back and forth, because a lot of these guys who are locked up, they have a lot of time in their hands, and if you don't reach out to them with Torah, someone's going to reach out to them with the Quran or Black nationalism or Hebrew Israelites. Being that we have to share this planet with other people, it behooves us to bring them to an understanding that is not harmful for us, and that we either impact the world or the world impacts us.
That's exact.
So what are your plans in the future? Do you have any plans of like moving to Israel or going to Israel to learn in yeshiva or anything like that?
Yeah, our plans as a community, we're corporate. Everything that we do, we like to do in a corporate mindset. So one of the goals that we have set is we plan to make a corporate Aliyah. This corporate Aliyah It will, for one, we're connected with, or we're partnership with a Zionist organization that is based in Israel now, that is Herut, or Mag Shemay Herut. And Herut, they deal with people making Aliyah. They deal with different social, economical, even political, just things and the rights of Jews, especially Jews who are making Aliyah. They seek to help and aid them in doing so. And so what they do with us is we actually spoken not too long ago about when the time is right, in due time, when our organization or when our community or synagogue is large enough to make Aliyah, they will actually help us in settling in Israel, a settlement, a community. Not like the Mona, but more, just a little bit more upgraded. And so not just that, but the main idea is that we would establish the Neo-Hasidic institution in the land of Israel. As of right now, there's not a Neo-Hasidic institution there. You have Reform, you have Conservative, you have, the Ultra-Orthodox. You have these different movements or these different institutions there in Israel, but you don't have the Neo-Hasidic, this modern Orthodox institution. So we are like the forerunners of that. That's what we seek to do. We seek to build the institution there. Once this happens, we will be able to actually have a place or a institution where those who seek to be modern Orthodox or Neo-Hasidic can make Aliyah and can have somewhere to go and call home in Israel, and not have to be absorbed in the other institutions if they didn't want to do that. They would have that option with us being there. And so that's one of the main goals that we have. Mm-hmm. And again, the spirituality that we teach, being one with the Creator, being one with God, becoming like the Creator. This is something that we teach. This is a goal that the Creator has predetermined for all of us, not just the Jew, but the Jew and the non-Jew. But the Jew is the leader in this. The Jew is a teacher of the light to the world, So we would lead in this type of spirituality. And,
how does this ideology or this movement differ from any other traditional Hasidic group? You said it's like Neo-Hasidic. Now, what are the tenets of this Neo-Hasidic movement?
It is Jews with a new spirit. That's the best way to put it. It's not.
Well, there's a lot of Hasidic groups out there. That's the thing. There aren't too many that cater to beginners. The vast majority of Hasidic movements, people are born into it. Now, there is a handful like Chabad and Breslov and like the more hippie types that people who are new to Judaism could also participate. But are you saying that this type of Hasidic movement is it caters more to African Americans or?
No, more to spirituality. It's inclusive to the hue. We have Jews of different hues in our synagogue. We have, white, black. We like to refer to it as a pancake unturned. On one side, you have this black, crispy, burnt side of the cake. And on the other side, it's not even cooked. And so it's, it's white, but it's one cake. This illustration was first given by the prophet Hosea. He speaks about, that Israel, we would become a pancake unturned. You would look at us and you say, oh, you really can't go off the biological aspect because the Jew is not biological. That's what we discover in spirituality. And this is something that Abraham knew. Our forefather Abraham knew this. He knew that this is not biological. So his followers, his trained servants, 318 of them, were from all 70 different nations. And they were all called Israel or Israel before Yaakov was called Israel. So we understand that this has nothing whatsoever to do with skin color because it's at the soul level. It's dealing with the soul. At the soul, we have Jewish soul, Gentile soul. But like you said earlier, everybody has this spark. This spark is what we call the Creator, is what we call the breath that he nefach, the piece of himself that he broke off and put into all of creation, the human conscious experience. And so the Jew is the first to realize this, that they're one, that we're one with God. We are individual aspects of God. And the Gentile is as well, or the person who doesn't have this revelation or doesn't come into this inner knowledge of inner self or higher self. They haven't reached that yet, but the Jew is there to aid them in reaching that. And so this idea of even just the Jewish soul, we can say it another way. We can say old soul. The Jew was the old So, but now this question becomes, who is a Jew? Because a Jew is, again, it's not one biological. So we understand that we're scattered to the four corners of the earth. And at the same time, we look like the rainbow. We're in different colors. And so somebody who has this revelation that they're one with God, or who seeks to chase after the Creator, this is the Jew. This is not a broadcast. I can't turn the TV and say, okay, this is who I need to go and talk to and congregate with and play tour with. It's not like that. We're dispersed, and it's a process which we're doing, like you said earlier. There's many different movements that are seeking to locate Jews, and so this is a good thing. This is something that we would advocate.
How do you feel? How do you feel about the oral law?
The oral law is something that is misunderstood. It's the oral law. When we go to the root, we call it the root. It's the root. Okay, Torah is a tree of life. This is something that, we as Jews, we say often. Torah is the tree of life, H. Chaim. But to this tree has branches and it has roots. What's written in the Torah, what's written in the Torah, that is branch language. So we'll read it. Literally it says, stone a person if they pick up sticks on Shabbat. But in the root language of Torah, it says something completely different, and it actually deals with the intention of the Creator. If we can connect to this intention, then we tap into what the Torah terms life without end. So the root, or the oral tradition, or the oral law, is something that is passed down from generation to generation, but it's not written down. Now, our people wrote it down. We really didn't write it off because it's infinite in nature. The oral law is infinite in nature. It's eternal, so you really can't write it down. But we try to write it down. Some of the writings, Mishnah, Talmud, things like that, we'll see some things are just irrelevant. You can't get around it. Some things are irrelevant. Some things are good. Some things are good to read and say, okay, we can see how this applies. Mm-hmm. But that is a result of not understanding the true oral law. The oral law is just that. It's oral. Mm-hmm. It's passed down from word to mouth.
I think it'll benefit you guys to just hop into the mainstream. In other words, I'm not for people just huddling in groups. Everything you said about Kabbalah is what the average Hasid believes. There's many Kabbalistic yeshivas, or yeshivas that are Kabbalistic inclined, particularly Chabad, who basically believe what you believe. I just think that if you guys just stay together, I think it'll affect your growth. I don't think that you should limit yourself to anything other than what everyone else is doing. Why should you not be able to study in the best yeshiva with the best rabbis and then have a better impact on this planet instead of just huddling in your group? Because there's a lot of rabbis who sound just like you do right now. I don't think you have to call it neo-Hasidic. This is just straight Hasidic. I'm not for people starting organizations and trying to reinvent the wheel when something already exists out there. You don't want to limit yourself. You want to be able to give yourself as many opportunities as you can. But
that right there is that's predetermined. That's going to happen. We advocate that. It's just a matter of time. We're not financially well off like most of our family.
I hear you.
Most Jews are, they're well off, man. So we only have so much to work with, and so we work with what we have. And then, as to being able to connect, that is our responsibility. We have to enter into, like you said, the top-notch yeshivas. We have to enter into the land of Israel where we can speak with influence and sit down with the rabbis, whichever sect that they are, whichever branch of Judaism, doesn't matter, because we are able to connect to all. And so that's predetermined. It's just a matter of when it will happen.
How do you feel about people who believe in Yeshua? Let's say, if someone who believes in Yeshua wants to join your organization, and he agrees with everything you're saying, because there's many people who are Messianic nowadays who are also Kabbalistically inclined, right? Mm-hmm. They believe all these ideas. They happen to believe that JC was the Messiah. But would you guys accept someone like that, or they would have to drop that belief?
If somebody who believed in Yeshua or Jesus as the Messiah, and they're Kabbalistically inclined, and they deal with spirituality, and they come into a place like ours, one or two things can happen. They would come in and leave out a different way, or they would come in and leave out the same way. If they come in and leave out the same way, then there's no transformation. There's no ascension. If they come out and leave a different way, then there's an ascension. In other words, they would understand that, okay, these guys were at one point the same as me, believing in Jesus, Yeshua, and at some point they elevated. They began to understand that this Jesus, or this Yeshua, he is somebody that is like a prototype to be like, but at the same time to rise above and go higher. Even with his own words, he says, that these works that I do, you can do and greater. And the idea behind worshiping him is where we would actually begin to show that that's an error, because you are an aspect of God, so you don't have to go to another man or another individual and do that. So we would not reject. In other words, we wouldn't reject anybody who comes into our community. But there is a education, an integral education that they would come into. And so they would either accept it or they would reject it. If they rejected it, there's no force amongst us. We don't force anybody to do anything. There's no force in the teachings. There's just a simple instruction that goes forth, and you can grab hold to it or you cannot. If you don't, then you will experience something different, and you will, you'll leave, and you probably talk down on us, or you might not. You might just, have your different opinions. But if you wanted to receive the different instructions, then you would make an ascension. You would connect. You would begin to grow, what we like to term a constant state of improvement. You would come into contact with that right there with us. And so that's what we would say to that, because we don't reject anybody.
Mm-hmm. How long were you locked up for?
I was incarcerated for 5 years.
You're a miracle. If God could do it with you, I believe God could do it with anybody. And I think that people have to hear stories like this more often. The thing is, with the average Jew, he begins to separate the world, not between the good and the bad, or the ethical and the unethical, but between the Jew and the Gentile, right?
Right.
But when you hear stories like yours, people begin to humanize people who otherwise they would never have thought of as a potential Jew. I remember once I was in Israel, and I was in a Shabbat table, and people were talking about the Palestinians, how they're horrible, this and that, and I just blurted out, I'm like, what if we offered them Judaism as an alternative to radical Islam? And then everyone looked at me and basically laughed and said, of course not. They're Arabs. They can't process complex notions of halakha and this and that. And it's because we failed to see the person in front of us, in this case our enemy, as an actual person that has the ability to change. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
We demonize our enemy to such an extent that all we're doing is creating more of them, more that we have to fight in the future, instead of at least giving them a viable alternative to radical Islam. What alternative do they have? I think if the average Jew was born a Muslim, he would die a Muslim. It's a great thing to do what Abraham did. This is why Abraham is so special in our religion, because he basically heard God's voice, picked up from where he was, and he went to where God wanted him to be. And that's what we got to do. We don't have to be happy with the lot we were given. If you were born Christian or born Muslim, only because you were born it, that doesn't mean that you have to remain that. All right? You could reach higher, you reach greater heights.
That is the purpose of the Jew. The Jew, when it speaks about in Torah, when it speaks about that we are to destroy certain nations and things like that, and of course these are stories to illustrate something that's higher. In the root, it talks about this thing that goes on with this extermination of ideology, this extermination of this idea of we are enemies, because in all actuality, there is no enemy other than one's own ego. With the Jew, we are to be the first to have this type of thinking. A Palestinian is a reflection of myself. If I can correct myself, then ultimately this Palestinian can as well, but because they will see it within me, I will be that light. They will attract. They will come to this light. And so you're right. I agree wholeheartedly with you, because that is our purpose as Jews. We're not to be like the other nations. The other nations, they war. The other nations, they deal with these different conflicts, but the Jew is to be the person who is bringing Judaism, in such a way where it's going to allow for the person to tap into unlimited potential. That's that's within them. It doesn't matter who it is. But you mentioned something important as well about, Islam. One of the things that we connect to a lot of Muslims, and this is even behind the wall. What we do is we have like 3 different levels of prayer that we deal with. The first level of prayer that we deal with, and we teach this to our students, the first level of prayer that we deal with is the carpet prayers, or the prayers of prostration. Now, if you notice how Muslims pray, this is how they pray. But they got this form of prayer from Abraham. But Abraham taught it to all of his sons. Yitzchak, or Isaac, he taught it to him the highest or the purest way. But there's no small wonder that Ishmael or Islam, they pray like this. Well, this is how we pray as well. Of course, we use Hebrew instead of Arabic, but our prayers and prostrating ourselves on a prayer rug, this is something that we've connected to Muslims behind the wall. They were shocked when they saw a lot of Hebrews. That's what we were going by at that time, but Jews as well, because they knew us as Jews, and they would see us pray like this. And I even had a bunkie that was he was Muslim, and he would do his prayers 5 times a day. I would do mine 3 times a day, like the Prophet Daniel. Mm-hmm. And so this connection, it can start at basic levels like that, and it can grow from there.
Well,
but
my organization is actually one of the few organizations that also encourages prostrating. Our Siddur, we have our own Siddur. Like if you go to TorahJudaism.com under publications, we have an illustration on how to prostrate, because the Jews of Yemen, particularly the Baladim, also kept, well, it's almost lost nowadays, but there's still a handful of Jews who prostrate. And a friend of mine lived probably 15 years within a Yemenite community in Jerusalem, and he basically documented how the prostrating was done. Not to mention that the Rambam mentions prostrating, and the Talmud also mentions prostrating. Right? In Islam, Islam is pretty much just a corrupted form of Judaism. Not just prostrating, even the hijab. The hijab, it's originally Jewish, because it appears also in the Rambam and in the Mishnah in terms that women would cover their necks and not just their heads. So I'm impressed that you guys are keeping that alive.
Yes, that's something that we have to do as Jews. That it was originally given to us, and we have to keep that lit. And this is that's the first level. The second level, of course, is the Siddurim. We utilize the Wiseman edition, the expanded art scroll Siddur, and we do traditional Shakarit, Minka Matarif prayers or services, and out of the Siddur. But then the next level of prayer that we deal with is the highest level of prayer, which is the prayer of meditation. This connects us to the different traditions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, because they deal with meditation. But the meditation that we actually employ is something that is been passed down. We link it all the way back to Abraham and how he taught it to his sons. But again, it was taught to Yitzchak, ultimately to Yaakov, the highest form or the highest way. So, the meditation that we employ is meditation of Mashiach. And this is something that it's different. It's different in many ways from a lot of the other meditations that exist. And the method, is different, but that's something that we teach as well. Mm-hmm. But that connects, it connects. And so, we're all about that connection. This connection, it's a unity that's found in Olam Haba, and that's what we try to demonstrate.
Do you guys have a website or something if someone wants to know more or possibly even join the organization? Where do they go?
Yes, we have a new website that we just got up there. It's called it is Congregation YeshivatZion.org. That's the organization website, and then we have www.RabbiRooseveltSolomonJr.com, that is Rabbi Moshe, that is his government name, Rabbi Roosevelt Solomon Jr. So we have 2 websites. If you want, I can send you a link to those websites.
All right, man. I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to us, and hopefully we'll make your organization a bit more known and help you guys grow.
Man, Baruch Hashem, and Torah Rabbah.